Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of The Deliberate Zoomer, hosted by myself, Silas Maynor, and my good friend, Michael Simonton. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Who?
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast with Michael and Silas, talking about living your 20s with intention, choosing to live your life, specifically your 20s, in a way that helps you to set yourself up for the rest of your life in a good trajectory that is at your intention. So today we're going to be talking about picking your first job. I know in our previous show, we talked about the whether or not to go to college, right? Deciding based off of your goals and what's important to you, should you or should you not go to college? And I believe that this is extremely relevant regardless of if you choose to go to college or if you choose not to, because I think work experience is such a valuable thing. You learn so much from working and doing and just kind of being exposed to the different areas. So we're going to talk about picking your first job. I guess what is your first kind of things here that you would think of, Michael, when you're considering and put yourself into the shoes of these people listening, right? What type of job would you pick? How would you discern what job you want to choose? What are the main factors? What are some of the things that you think about?
Well, when it comes to picking your first job, I think one thing that is imperative to know walking in is that it's your first job. It's not a marriage. This is not something that you're going to have to make work for the rest of your life. So understand that, walk in with that mindset. So it relieves some pressure, and so that this isn't permanent. Your first job doesn't have to be the absolute best. You don't have to be walking in with a clear, defined goal. You are just getting experience and learning. And so with that in mind, you should prioritize differently. Your first job shouldn't necessarily be about, the best, most highest paying position you can grab. It shouldn't be about, the prestige and all that. It should be focused on experiences that you're going to gain and skills that you're going to develop, as well as, for me personally, a huge part of that was finding a company that I believed in and a product that I loved. And I think that's also important considering in your first job. That is somewhat of a luxury for some of us. So that's not the top of the list, but it is something to consider if given the opportunity. So I think those are some things that this conversation should really be prefaced with, because they will alter the way you approach it, and it will drastically impact that. And I think it's a much more holistic and healthy approach than coming in, set on, I want to be exactly this, making exactly this amount of money, and this is all I want to do. No, you want to come in, you want to have an open mind. You're there to learn, you're there to grow, you're there to develop, you're there to build a network. And it's not just about, that paycheck. So.
Yeah, I think that's important, in either case. So I guess, for example, in my life, so my first real job, I guess you could say, when I sold insurance for a year and a half, I went into it partially because the opportunity was just presented to me, right? I didn't really have a lot of other prospects at the time as far as, long-term sustainable work that was a good living. So I went into that, got my insurance license, did it, and I went into it with the idea that, this job is going to be great. I'm going to work at this for a long time. I'm going to make a lot of money. It's going to be great. That's not exactly how it turned out. I did make a lot of money. I did really well on the job, but I wasn't in love with it. And I didn't hate the job entirely. There was a lot of parts of it that I, looking back, I realized I really enjoyed helping my clients. I enjoyed working with these families. So I was able to learn from that. And I think that the biggest takeaway that I feel most people will have to learn at some point too, and again, this is depending on the person, but is that money is really not the end. Like you said, don't go in just worrying about the paycheck. It has to be something you really enjoy and something you're passionate about. So especially, when you're choosing that first job, and again, for myself in that situation, had I been more picky about it and, been afraid of it, I wouldn't have done it, and I wouldn't have learned so many things. I learned so much. I had a great mentor, and really that set me in a motion to figure out, what I wanted, but also to keep going in towards really relatively prestigious jobs for somebody of my age, right? So I think that it's also important to, again, just to close off that idea that choosing the job should not be solely based off of the pay, right? If you have two different options and one pays $2 higher per hour than the other, but the other one seems like it's going to be more exciting to you, it just gets you excited in general, probably choose that one that gets you excited.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Choose one that gets you excited. Choose the one that you're going to wake up, stoked to go to work to every day, and that you're going to learn and grow from. And so I think that, like we were just saying, that's the approach you should have in mind when you come to taking your first job. The next thing I think you should really focus in on is, of course, your interests. So what are you interested in? And you don't have to have all the answers right off the bat. You don't, like we discussed in the goals, you could just have a clear, a vague idea of what you're going for. In which case, that's fantastic, because especially if you're operating in the startup space, there's a lot of room to move around in. There's a lot of ways to leverage whatever it is you're learning to progress you to another field, department, role. So there's plenty of opportunities once you get into a role. With that in mind, it kind of relieves, again, that pressure of having that exact, specific, well-defined, clear outline and role. So you can find anything. So how I started was I knew I liked people. I knew I needed to get into something where I was interacting with people. I have tons of experience in the service industry. So I have plenty of experience handling people, communicating, problem solving, stuff like that. And so that's what I leveraged. And that's what I figured out. That's what I leaned into to use to create opportunities for me in spaces like sales where I hadn't had experience yet. And so with that, I was able to, I pitched a bunch of different companies. It was communication with all sorts of different people in different roles. And so I was able to acquire the role that I am in now as a sales. But another thing when it came to picking a job was I talked to people. I talked to people in their roles. I learned what job I thought I wanted, and I started talking to the people and figuring out what that day-to-day looked like, and really helped me figure out if that's what I was going to be comfortable with doing for some time. Like I said, it's not a marriage. I'm not married to this role. I don't necessarily plan on staying in this specific role for very long. I'd like to progress, but it was the entry level job, and that most people need a bachelor's to get into, which I don't have. So that's awesome. And I'm going to use that to leverage the rest of my career, to keep growing and developing, because I'm optimizing for skills. I'm optimizing for opportunity. And I think that's how you should approach it. I don't know how, so you obviously, you had that experience with the insurance, so you had plenty of people skills and selling abilities before you got your role, but how did you go about picking the role that you're in today? Because I think that could really shed some light.
So that's a really interesting thing I wanted to bring up at some point. I guess we can talk about it now. Is when I got into, so after during my insurance career, like I got to a point where I realized the money wasn't, I didn't want to be there just to make money. Like I had made a certain amount, and I was like, I'm happy making this. I don't need to go to the next level, because to me that's just like, it's pointless. I'm just going to spend more money, which is kind of a waste. So I was able to try to figure out what I wanted to do, and ended up in praxis, ended up in a different role. But then once I got into a certain point, I ended up getting a couple different job opportunities on the table. Now, the part I wanted to back up before I answer your question is I want to bring this up is the connections that I made through praxis, through communities. Obviously, it could be through anything. You could, working at some kind of job, especially startups, because they attract a certain type of people, certain kind of entrepreneurial type of people who typically go and do some pretty great things. Whether it's innovating or supporting an innovator, you're going to meet these people who then will be connections who can help you get into new jobs. So with what I also want to bring up, which is a point that you had touched on, is selling your past skills for your new role, regardless of what you've done, whether it's waiting tables or serving coffee, whether it's cutting down Christmas trees. Like all of these things do have transferable skills, right? As a headhunter, I have a lot of people who get kind of annoying at times, where they say, hey, I have all these transferable skills. Sometimes it's true, but in specific technical areas, it's difficult. But when you're talking about general roles, you can really sell your past experience for the new role by just, putting a 10 cents of effort into it. Like just put a little bit of effort into selling yourself. So I wanted to touch on that, but there's a couple other things we'll go back to. To answer your question, how did I choose this role? So at the time when it came to choosing this role, I had 3 different opportunities on the table. 2 of them were from one contact of mine who introduced me to 2 different people, 2 different companies. And I had a third opportunity that was potentially on the table. It wasn't an official offer at the time, for something else that I had gained through Praxis and through a pitch video. And to give a background, this role that I'm in now obviously is in New York. The other one was in Atlanta, and the other one was going to be in San Francisco. Now, for me being in the middle of nowhere, we're from the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin, it was very exciting to me, but also it was very tough to make the decision because you have these 3 majorly different lifestyles that you're going to end up going into if you go towards it. And what I ended up doing was I just narrowed it down to the 2 places that I had offers from, because I didn't have the offer from the other one. They had to wait a couple more weeks. So I decided to go to those 2, and it was very difficult. But what I did was focused on my gut feeling about what I really wanted, right? So I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted. I guess I shouldn't say it. I had a clear idea that I wanted to be in the startup space, and I wanted to start my own startup at some point. So I tried to just basically look at them and say, which one is better? I did a huge pros and cons list on a big whiteboard and everything, and had people look at it and give me feedback. And there was really, it made it a little bit clearer, but it still was hard to say no to the other one. So what I did was just thought about it for a while and sat and felt, which one would I feel like I missed out on if I didn't do? And it was the one moving to New York, right? Because who wouldn't want to move to New York? So I ended up doing that. So in that case, there was no specific example like, oh, I'm going to do this job because it helps me launch towards my goals faster. In the end, it's going to help me do that compared to the other. But it really came down to a gut feeling, which I think is part of what we need to get to in this discussion, is that gut feeling of what do you want when you don't really know what you want.
Okay. Yeah. No, I could see that. The gut feeling, my thoughts on that is like, So what brought me into my role? One of the main things was, I was in discussion with another company as well, is that I had the gut feeling, but I was also looking for good people to work with. And so that was something that was important to me too, is I knew who I was working with. I had built up a better relationship with them. And I knew that I'd love working for that individual. And so that really brought me on board there. But when it comes to gut feeling, that for me, that ties in with the mission and purpose of a company and stuff like that. So having that connection there is gonna help you so much more in your career and in that role. And so it's imperative to have that. I think you're very right there. I want to touch on the leveraging your network factor, what you said there, because I think that's something that it's an obstacle that people run into a lot when they're looking for their first job. They're questioning like, okay, well, I don't really know anyone. I don't know how I'm going to get into this. So to give a great personal example, I was working at a coffee shop, and merely by mentioning to my regulars, customers, and I strike up conversation all the time, I was actually able to build up quite a few different leads there. I was able to network with these people who came in. They worked for, some of them worked for like Honda. I had one that worked for some startups out of foreign countries and stuff, and they were super interested because I built that relationship with them, and they saw that I was interested in what they were doing. And they were more than happy to be like, hey, well, like, let me know if you're looking for a role because I will help you out. And so leveraging that network, no matter where you are, you have a network, and it's imperative to leverage that, especially when looking for opportunities, because it's going to open up so many doors, but also you'll be having warm leads. Like, you're not going to be out just sending in a resume or cold outreach to these companies. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to get to, which I think is, and you have a really good example of it, which is what Meg Jay mentions in the book, the Defining Decade, which is weak ties. She calls it weak ties. So basically, there's people that you really know well, right? And you feel very comfortable asking them for something, right? You could totally walk up to your best friend and say, "Hey, do you know anybody looking for this job or looking to hire somebody?" And they're probably going to say no, because if they had known, they probably would have told you already. So she talks about leveraging weak ties, which is essentially what you did, because people, this is again human psychology, naturally have a desire to help others, right? So when you have these people you were meeting at the coffee shop you're working at, like they just naturally see somebody who was obviously different, because you would strike up a conversation with them, like, and be kind of engaging. And then you clearly had something that you were trying to accomplish. You were looking to go to the next step. And why wouldn't they want to help you? Like, why not? First of all, you gave them coffee, so they should be totally happy to help you. Second of all, they want to. So that's the point, is leveraging weak ties, reaching out to the people you've met by acquaintance. And I think LinkedIn is really powerful for this, but people don't use it as much for this, is the people you don't really know. You know roughly that, hey, they have some exposure to this, but you don't actually know what their whole background is and who they might know. Just reaching out to them and saying, hey, I would really be keen to see if you know anybody in this space, or could you at least, have 10, 20 minutes to have a conversation with me about this topic? Because more than likely they will be willing to have that conversation, and then their network can really be what gets you to that next role.
Absolutely. And I hadn't heard that term, weak ties. I yet to read that fantastic book. But I think that's a great term, and it's a great way to put it. And you'd be surprised, as anyone listening, you really would be so surprised at how willing people are to help, especially if you exhibit some sort of forward tilt, if you're interested, if you're hungry and you're getting after it, and you put yourself out there. So for one, if we're taking this in steps, say the first thing is just start putting yourself out there. Start talking about it. Start mentioning it to anyone. Like, you shouldn't be ashamed ever that you're starting off or that you're looking for a first job. You should own it. There's no point in being ashamed of it. Everyone is at that stage at some point in their life. And what you'll find is a lot of older people, whether or not they have opportunities for you, are so much more than willing and happy to help you, whether it's through guidance, through mentorship, or just giving advice, because it's a struggle, and we've all started there. And so, like you said, that psychology, you just want to help. And so leverage those ties for starters. Yep. Then, you can narrow it down by your interests. And I think that's probably where this conversation would lead to next is, well, what are you interested in? What sort of careers do you want to go after? What sort of lifestyle are you going to want to have? If you are, if you're going into the doctor's field, so I had some friends and going through their rotations and stuff, and that was one of their big concerns, was they would look at, like, they all love medical stuff. They had their, top priorities and stuff, but they would talk about how the lifestyles that they wanted to live and how that would affect and fluctuate based on the specialty they went after. So, if they're going to be a surgeon, they're going to be on call, and that's not something everyone's going to be up for. So you don't want to be on call 24/7, don't go for a surgeon. But to take that into sales terms, or to regular business, some roles will require more from you than others, and some will require you to be like on call all the time. So maybe don't go for one of those. Find out what it is you're looking for, especially what you're looking to gain from it, and then prioritize for that. So, like, what experiences are you after? Simple question, but that will give you a lot of direction on what your first job should be or where you want to go with it.
Yeah, I think that, so one thing that I recall now, so essentially the story with getting my insurance job was, it was sold to me because my boss obviously was, I had known ever since I was a kid. And he sold it to me basically saying, what do you want to do? I told him at some point I want to run a business. And he said, you know what, you're going to need sales skills. So kind of reverse engineering what you want to do, even if you don't know what it is specifically, can be helpful to help choose, all right? Specifically for the people who didn't go to college. Like, if you didn't go to college and you want to just use your experience as your education, then figure out what skills you want. Like if you have a rough idea, I want to be a business owner, or, I want to be whatever, reverse engineer it. I need to get these skills, so I'm going to go to these jobs that are going to teach me these skills. Another thing that was super interesting to me was, so one of my friends' spouse was telling me that he's very successful. He's only like 28, 29, and he's very senior in his company, which is a global company. So he got to where he is, and he said that his biggest piece of advice was picking your boss over your job. Like if you can pick your boss, specifically whether you're moving internally in your company or going to a new company, picking your boss, he said, was the most valuable piece of advice he could offer. And I think that's very interesting, because again, it's not so much about the company sometimes, it's about the people you work with and the influence they're going to have on you. Do they actually care about you? Are they going to try to help align your personal goals with the company goals so that everything is very much in harmony? That's one thing that I'm so happy that I've been able to achieve here. Obviously it's somewhat luck, but my current boss is completely understanding that the people he brings in are likely not going to be with the company forever, right? He understands they're probably going to be there for 3 to 5 years, and then they're going to go on to something else. So he says, what are your personal goals? What do you want to accomplish? And then we just find a way to tie that all in together with the business goals, so that we're working in complete harmony with complete transparency, which is something we'll also talk about in another episode, is honesty. But no, I think that's great stuff. So what are some of the other things, I guess, for people not sure, again, helping to figure out their interests? I know you mentioned already you're not married to the first job you take, which I think is very important. You don't have to feel like you're chained to this job for 3 years. I think that one thing I've gathered is a lot of people are afraid of making job changes too often because their resume looks silly. But I guess what are your thoughts there? I know that it doesn't really, having short stints at companies doesn't always look bad on a resume. It depends on how you structure it. But what are some of the other things that you would add here?
Oh, I would add that if you don't know what you're going for, and you're still, so I've got a bunch of younger siblings, and they're always like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And my first response is just do something. Doesn't matter. Like, you're looking for your first job. It's not a marriage. It might not even be a field you want to be in for the rest of your life or for the next 5 years, but doing something is most important. So make sure you just start doing something. For instance, my little sister she's working for an insurance agency, filling out claims and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. And she's not interested in doing that. But I was like, Maria, you don't understand. This is where you just need experience, and you need to learn and somewhere to grow. And that was a perfect opportunity for that. She was torn between that and doing something similar to like a Panera or a coffee shop. And I was like, no, your first job is prioritizing for experience and for growth. And so doing something, even if it's not what you dreamed about doing, even if it's not the most glamorous thing, just doing something is very imperative. So that's another hurdle people run into. When it comes to resumes, that really boils down to selling yourself. So when you are going after your first job and you don't have a lot of experience, you're going to run into some objections and some rejections, and that's perfectly natural. You can't let it get to you. Okay. You're not the perfect role for all companies. They're not the perfect company for you. Most of the time, if it doesn't work out, it's mutually beneficial. So don't take that with a grain of salt, but realize that when it comes to pitching companies, when it comes to getting that first job, you have to sell yourself. This isn't something where like they'll look at the resume and be like, oh, well, you were a 4.0 student in high school. I see you did great in college, blah, blah, blah. You checked all these boxes. You're great. We're hiring you. No. What happens is you walk in there with that resume and you tell a story. You create a narrative about yourself and the type of person that you are, and then you pitch them on that. You're selling yourself in every single interview. It's a sales pitch on selling yourself. And that's something that people need to realize walking into a role or walking into an interview for their first job, is that This isn't just something where they look at your resume and they check off the boxes. You're like, okay, you know Excel, you've done this, this, and this, perfect. No, you go in there and you align your goals, you align yourself with the company values and goals. You create that rapport with your interviewer. You build that relationship. You smile at everyone as you walk in the door. You say hi and good morning, because these could be your future coworkers. And you want to leave such a good impression that when you walk out of the door, those people will walk up to whoever interviewed you, your boss, and be like, hey, how did he do? I thought he was super pleasant. I was just want to see, like, what do you think we'll hear back about that guy? You want to create those sorts of impressions. You want to sell yourself. And I think that, ties in with picking and getting your first job. And that's super important. I cannot stress it enough.
I think we'd also be terrible praxis participants if we didn't plug Crash at this point. I think that for anybody who's not familiar with what Crash is, essentially like Isaac Morehouse would basically summarize it. It's just a better version of a resume, right? And I think that the point I want to bring up here is that specifically if you're young and trying to get a new job, a first job, right, or a different job, resumes aren't necessarily necessary. It's a lot of necessaries, but what is necessary is, as Michael mentioned, is selling yourself on what you've done in the past and what you can do. So being targeted, right? Not just throwing out your resume or your pitch to everybody, but finding, like, once we talked about it before, narrowing down your options, going away from what you don't like, putting in line with what's important to you. And, once you kind of have those things crossed off the list, and then you have some focus as to what is important in your life and what type of lifestyle you want to live, as you mentioned before, then you can narrow down to the types of companies you'd like to work for. You might not know the industry, but you know the type of company. And then you go out targeted and you reach out to them specifically to help get that opportunity, right? Because that's how you can use your past experience. You can create a video, a Loom video or something that says, hey, I see that you're looking for this. I can bring this to the table. Here's examples of it. And that's very important, I think, for people to read, for people to realize, because it's a paradigm shift of, oh, give me a shot versus here's proof that I can do what you need me to do. Let's have a conversation. Mm-hmm. That's, I guess, we're coming up on our time here. What are some other things that you might add as far as, just in general, choosing the first jobs?
I mean, when it comes to selling, you're selling potential. So you want to make sure that you make that clear that you have potential and that you can definitely accomplish what they're looking for, whether or not you have those experiences or not yet. Make sure you relate everything. I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, because you're leveraging your network, you're narrowing it down, you're being targeted with your outreach, you're using your past experiences and painting them and aligning them with company goals and values. Once you start doing all those things, you will see an influx in opportunities. And you'll also see, you'll see a much higher percent of success as opposed to just blasting out a bunch of resumes. I am, for one, of the opinion that the resumes are basically dead. It's super two-dimensional and you don't convey a lot of experiences. So make sure, again, you leverage those interactions, you leverage those connections, you use your weak ties, I believe, and you really focus in on those. That's all I've got from me today. Silas, do you have anything else to add?
I think just to tie it all together, right, going back from our first episodes on this show here, is, obviously we want, the whole point of this choosing your first job is it's all in line with you. Again, the choosing. You've decided that you're going to be the captain of your life. You've decided that much. So this is also part of that decision, right? Choosing your first jobs or your new jobs, whatever it is. The other side of it, or the other bit of it, is deciding, once you've defined what you want. Remember, this job should be in line with what you want, not just because it's the best money. It should really be in line with those values that you have as your core foundation, specifically if you don't know what you're looking for. If you do know, if you have a 5 or 10 year plan that you're trying to go for, like you want to start a business or do something, make sure that this can help you accelerate towards that goal, right? Because if you're going to work for somebody else before you go do your own thing, it should definitely be beneficial. So make sure that's in line. And then, obviously, again, make sure that you're getting the right experience. You're filling you're learning things that are going to benefit you in your future life. And I think, again, yes, pick your boss wisely, because those people are going to teach you. They're going to essentially be your mentors, especially if you're working with them on a daily basis. So be very careful about that and make sure it's all aligned with what you've done, all the work you've put in up to this point. Yeah, I think that's about everything for today. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time where we talk about being honest and being very transparent. So thank you guys so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.